Would you believe that a dog ran to the neighbor's house and barked endlessly to save its owner who was having a bad time? This scene that looks like something out of a thriller happened for real in the United States and left everyone who followed the story moved and impressed with the courage and loyalty of a four-legged friend. But before diving into the details, tell me, have you ever stopped to think about how much dogs can perceive things that many times we do not even imagine? Instincts, quick reactions, a unique sensitivity. It is as if they have a sixth sense capable of identifying when something is not right, and when this instinct mixes with love and loyalty, extraordinary situations can happen. Imagine for a moment. It's night, the neighborhood is silent, and inside a house someone begins to feel bad, with no one around to provide help. Minutes that seem eternal, the body asking for help, but without a voice to call for help. Who would notice? Who would have the capacity to act at that critical moment? This is exactly where the real protagonist of this story comes in, a dog that refused to stand still in the face of danger. Can you visualize this scene? The heart racing, the instinct speaking louder, and the decision to act without a second thought. What is striking in this case is not only the fact that the dog realized that its owner was at risk, but the way he reacted, rushing to the neighbor's house, barking insistently, scratching at the door, doing everything to be heard. It's as if he knew that every second could make a difference between life and death. And the most amazing thing is that the neighbor, being woken up by the insistent noise, realized that something very serious was happening. The question is, where does this ability of dogs to understand when their owners are in danger come from? Is it pure intuition, the fruit of daily coexistence, or is there something deeper, almost inexplicable? Have you ever experienced something similar, when your dog seems to have noticed your mood, your pain, or even a health problem before you even notice it? Many people report amazing stories of dogs that have warned about crises, accidents, or risky situations, as if they were connected to their owners by an invisible thread. And maybe that's what it is, a connection that goes beyond words, built on the foundation of trust, coexistence, and unconditional love. What you will find out now may surprise you, because this story is not just about a dog that barked at a neighbor's door. It's about the power of the bond between humans and animals, about how loyalty can turn into courage, and at certain moments, literally save a life. Stay with me until the end to understand every detail of this narrative that moved not only the family involved, but the entire community around, generating repercussions even in the local media. But beware, this introduction is only the beginning. We are talking about critical seconds, about instinctive decisions, and about an unlikely hero who did not hesitate to act when all seemed lost. And what happened next will further show how this dog became a symbol of loyalty and courage. Want to know how the neighbor reacted when he opened the door? And what did you find when you followed the dog into the house? This is exactly what we will find out in the next part of this story. Want to know how the neighbor reacted when he opened the door? And what did you find when you followed the dog into the house? Calm down, we'll get there. But first, I want to ask you something important. If this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what touched you the most so far. It could be a memory of when your dog noticed something no one else noticed, a personal experience, or even your opinion on how animals seem to have such a powerful instinct. Believe me, sharing your vision here helps not only create a conversation between us, but also strengthen this community of people who, just like you, value stories that excite and inspire. And since we're talking about strengthening, take the opportunity to enjoy this video. This simple gesture shows that you are with me on this journey and makes this message reach even more people who may need to hear something like this today. It's like when a bark breaks the silence of the night to get attention. Every like is a sign that this story deserves to be spread. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, this is the perfect time. Thus you guarantee that you will continue to follow content like this, full of emotion, courage, and ties that remind us how special animals are in our lives. Your submission is what gives me motivation to keep bringing you stories that touch the heart and make us reflect on the value of the true connection between humans and dogs. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about watching a video. It's about being part of something bigger, a chain of people who believe that love, loyalty, and courage can transform lives. So comment, like, and subscribe, because your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach even more people with much-needed messages. And now, returning to our story, Imagine the neighbor opening the door in the middle of the night, still not quite understanding why that dog was so agitated. The neighbor opens the door in the middle of the night, still confused, trying to understand why that dog seemed so agitated. The animal did not stop barking, as if every sound was a cry of urgency. His eyes reflected the mixture of fear and determination, and the neighbor, taken by curiosity and the instinct that something was wrong, decides to follow him. This is the point where the story begins to unfold, in fact, and to understand the weight of that moment, we need to go back a little and know who the man was who was inside that house and the deep bond he had with his faithful companion. The owner was a simple, middle-aged man who led a quiet life in a quiet neighborhood in the United States. He worked every day, had a routine marked by well-defined schedules, and although he enjoyed the solitude that life offered him, he was never really alone. At his side was always the dog he had adopted as a puppy, one of those seemingly small decisions that end up changing the course of an entire life. It wasn't just a pet, it was a journey partner, a constant presence that brought companionship on good days and silent support on hard days. The dog, a medium-sized mestizo with brown hair and always attentive eyes, had become an inseparable part of that routine. He not only waited for the owner to arrive from work, but seemed to understand every gesture, every emotion, every silence. It was as if the two had developed a language of their own, made up of looks and small signs, which dispensed with any words. Anyone who lives with a dog knows well what this means. A connection that is not explained, but that is felt deep in the soul. Every morning they walked around the block together. It wasn't just physical exercise, it was a ritual. The man spoke little, but the dog seemed to hear everything, responding with tail movements and that deep look, capable of transmitting understanding. In the late afternoon, while the owner sat on the balcony for coffee, the dog lay at his feet as if on permanent watch, always ready to protect, always willing to stay nearby. Small gestures, but that added up, revealed the level of trust and attachment between them. This simple routine hid something bigger. The dog was not just company, he had become a silent guardian, someone who noticed even the slightest changes in mood, who reacted when the owner was sad, who offered presence when words were not enough. Anyone who has lived this experience knows that a dog can be a mirror of our own emotions, reflecting what we feel and sometimes anticipating what is to come. And it is precisely at this point that the story gains even more strength. Because when we talk about animal loyalty, we are talking about something that goes beyond biology. We are facing a bond that is built day after day, through choices, coexistence, and trust. It's not just about having someone by your side, but about living a silent transformation in which both man and dog shape each other's lives. A journey of affection that creates a hidden truth. Animals understand us in ways that often even we ourselves cannot. The owner, without even realizing it, had built with that dog a relationship of absolute surrender. Behind the scenes of an ordinary life, an extraordinary connection was hidden. A partnership that showed how simple decisions, such as adopting a puppy from a shelter, can have profound impacts not only in the present, but also in decisive moments when everything seems to be hanging by a thread. The dog not only received care, but also returned it multiplied in the form of instinct, courage, and attention. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what makes this story so moving is not only the heroic act itself, but the ground on which it was built. Years of living together, of mutual trust, of shared silence that gave the dog the sensitivity to realize that something was not right. It's as if his mind has been trained by love and routine to react to the unexpected. This perception was not born of chance, but of daily coexistence, of exchanged glances, of the nights when the dog slept next to the bed, and of the days when they walked side by side through the neighborhood. The relationship between owner and dog is a powerful reminder that life is made of details. Every moment lived together shapes the mindset and strengthens trust. It is in this silent space, but full of meaning, that bonds are created capable of transforming ordinary situations into extraordinary acts of courage. It is a process of mutual learning in which man finds companionship and the dog finds purpose. The hidden truth here is that we often don't pay due attention to these little connections until they reveal themselves at the instant we need them most. This story, as singular as it is, carries a universal impact. Everyone who has ever had a pet knows the power of this bond. It is something that defies rational explanations, but which is proven in practice, in everyday life, in situations where the animal's instinct turns into real protection. The owner of that house may never have imagined that his life would literally be in the paws of his dog, but the loyalty built over the years set the stage for this moment. And that's why, as we look at this narrative, we realize that it's not just about an isolated, heroic act. It is about a journey of coexistence, about choices that shape destinies, about the revelation that when we open ourselves to this connection, we are able to live experiences that transcend the obvious. Every step taken by a dog's side is an investment in trust, in love, and in something that cannot be bought or measured, the certainty that when we need it most, we will not be alone. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this relationship of loyalty and attention invites us to reflect on the way we live our own bonds. Are we attentive to the signs that life gives us? Do we recognize the value of the small presences that accompany us on a daily basis? Or do we only realize the real impact of these connections when something unexpected happens? The story of this man and his dog leads us to think about the importance of cultivating true relationships, based on trust and surrender, because they are the ones that sustain the critical moments of our journey. And when we think of transformation, we realize that it does not happen in isolated grand gestures, but rather behind the scenes of life, in the seemingly small details that build the foundation for extraordinary acts. It is as if the dog had learned over the years that every decision to stay by the owner's side, every moment of silent attention, every look of complicity was part of an invisible training that, at the right moment, would make all the difference. This is the great revelation behind the story. Courage does not arise from nothing. It is the fruit of a coexistence marked by trust and dedication. And as we recognize this, we are invited to look at our own relationships with new eyes, understanding that every gesture of care, every word of support, every moment of attention can turn into something much greater when life puts us in the face of unexpected challenges. Write in the comments, this makes sense to me. It was a seemingly ordinary night, silent like so many others in that quiet neighborhood. The clock was already striking almost midnight, and the neighborhood slept under a blanket of calm. The streets were deserted, lit only by the lampposts that cast their yellowish light on the damp asphalt of the Serene. Inside the house, the man had already collected himself after another exhausting day of work. He was someone who carried the routine marked by commitments and responsibilities, and each night he found in the home the only refuge against the weight of the hours. After a quick shower and a simple dinner, he settled into his room. On the bedside table, a cup of tea was still steaming, exuding a soft aroma that filled the room. The dog, his inseparable companion, always occupied the same place, lying next to the bed, in an alert position, like an attentive guardian. This nightly ritual was repeated almost as a silent pact between them, the owner seeking repose and the dog ensuring that nothing disturbed him. The environment conveyed peace, but behind the scenes of that calm scenario, something began to change imperceptibly. Suddenly, a strange sensation takes hold of the man's body. First, an unobtrusive pressure on the chest, which he tries to ignore. It must be tiredness, he thinks, or perhaps a digestive upset. But in a few minutes, the feeling gains strength, becoming oppressive, almost suffocating. Cold sweat begins to trickle down your forehead, while your breathing becomes irregular. The heart races, and at the same time seems to fail in its rhythm. The malaise intensifies, robbing him of energy. Every movement, no matter how small, required a huge effort, as if he was fighting an invisible force that was pushing him down. This is the kind of moment that changes everything, a watershed between the before and the after. Life has this silent way of confronting us. In the midst of the ordinary, the unexpected arises, and the hidden truth of our fragility is revealed. The man was alone. There were no family members around, no neighbors awake to hear a distress call. Every second counted, and despair was accompanied by the realization that there was no way to reach for the phone or scream for help. But I wasn't really alone. There, at the foot of the bed, the dog noticed before any words. The animal raised its head, ears alert, eyes fixed on the owner. Something was out of place. It was not just the slow movements, but a set of subtle signs that only those who live daily can notice. The rhythm of breathing, the smell of cold sweat, the silence broken by the barely audible groan. All this was interpreted by the dog's instinct as an alarm. He approaches, touches the owner's hand with his muzzle, insists on waking him up to reality. The man tries to answer, but the body does not obey. This is the most impressive part. The dog not only identifies the problem, he understands that he needs to take action. There is no logical reasoning, no lengthy reflection, only immediate decision. This is when the tension grows. Outside, the night remains calm. The neighboring houses remain dark, their residents plunged into dreams. The clock ticks every minute like a hammer blow, echoing the mercilessly oozing time. Inside the house, the scene is one of silent struggle, the man's body giving way, and the dog seized by a restlessness that won't let him sit still. He barks low, circles around the bed, again pushes the owner with his muzzle. Nothing changes. Then, in an impulse of courage, he makes the decision that would change the fate of that night. This scene is not only exciting, it carries a powerful symbolism. How many times in our own lives do we ignore the signs? The body warns us, the mind warns us, but we insist on believing that it is only a passing thing. How many times have we been blind to the small warnings, leaving it for later, until it becomes too late? This story becomes a metaphor for how we need to be attentive to detail, not just in health, but in all areas of life: relationships, work, personal choices. Neglect in the face of signs can be costly. The human body, at a time like this, is a silent battlefield. While the heart struggles to keep pace, the lungs struggle to pull in air, and the mind tries to stay conscious. But man is trapped in his own vulnerability. There is no voice, there is no strength. All that remained was to trust, even without knowing it, that loyal four-legged presence. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because what unfolds here goes beyond a medical episode. It is the raw portrait of life, showing how it can turn around in a matter of seconds. It's proof that every decision made in the past, how to open the doors of the home to a dog, devote time to it, build trust, can turn into an unimaginable impact in the future. It is a reminder that simple choices, those that often seem unimportant, are precisely those that shape destiny. Behind the scenes that night, the bond built over the years revealed itself. Every walk in the late afternoon, every glance exchanged, every gesture of care had created an invisible foundation. The dog, prepared by this coexistence, was ready to act. He didn't hesitate. While the owner felt life slipping away in silence, the animal decided to be his voice, his hope, his only chance. This growing tension also invites us to reflect on our own journey. How many times do we move forward on autopilot, not realizing that we are missing important signals? How often do we not listen to ourselves or to those around us? The story of this man is a mirror that shows us how we need to revise our mentality. We need to learn to value the details, to respect the limits, to recognize that transformation begins when we decide to pay attention to what really matters. The man, lying down and frail, perhaps still had flashes of consciousness. Perhaps you thought for a brief second about the fear of not waking up the next morning. Perhaps you remembered the family, unfinished dreams, promises made to yourself. But none of this would matter if there was no one to intervene. The dog, on the other hand, did not need long reflections. He knew he couldn't wait. Loyalty ceased to be just a feeling and turned into action. And it is in this contrast between human weakness and animal courage that the story reaches its strongest point. This moment has a universal impact. It reminds us that no matter how strong or independent we consider ourselves, there will always be times when we need something beyond ourselves. Be it a friend, a family member, a partner, or even an animal. The value of bonds lies precisely in this, in rescuing ourselves when we no longer have the strength. The revelation here is not just about a health attack, but about the invisible force that is born of love, trust, and constant presence. With every passing minute, the man's life was at risk. But next to him was the dog, which refused to watch in silence. This scene is a living reminder that we are not alone even when we think we are. There is always someone or something capable of becoming the bridge between fragility and hope. He says, "I'm on this journey too." The dog remained restless, walking in circles around the room, as if trying to find a way out of the despair that was spreading through the air. His every step was marked by a quickening beat, an anxious rhythm that contrasted with the almost absolute silence of the night. His eyes, shining amid the gloom, reflected the silent anguish of one who understood somehow that something was deeply wrong. The atmosphere, which until moments before had conveyed calm and familiarity, now seemed loaded, heavy, suffocating. It was as if the air itself had become denser, difficult to breathe. The ragged sound of the owner's breathing, broken by longer and longer pauses, echoed like a warning that something terrible was about to happen. The dog approached the bed, leaned its wet muzzle against the man's hand, stepped back, again pushed his arm insistently, as if trying to pull him out of a state of torpor. He moaned low, an almost human wail, trying to break through the abyss between the sleeping consciousness of the owner and the urgency of the moment. But there was no answer. The silence confirmed the seriousness. It was then that the dog seemed to awaken something deeper than instinct, a raw, visceral energy, an inner call that screamed within him, "I need to act now." It was no longer just loyalty. It was responsibility. It was the silent love of years of living together, turning into decision, into movement, into courage. Many would say that dogs just react, that they are moved by simple stimuli and conditioning. But anyone who has ever lived side by side with one knows that there is something beyond, something that escapes the cold explanations of science. They notice nuances that go unnoticed by us, an imperceptible smell for us, a muffled sound that we would never notice, a minimal change in body posture. But above all, they perceive the unsaid, that which is hidden between the lines of daily coexistence. The dog not only caught cold sweat, not only the broken rhythm of breathing. He knew it wasn't the owner he knew, and because he knew the usual so well, he knew how to identify the extraordinary. This immediate perception is what makes us reflect. How many times in our own lives have we failed to notice the signs? How many times have we ignored clear warnings because we were too busy, too distracted, or simply relied on the illusion that it will pass? The dog did not give himself this luxury. He did not hesitate, did not doubt. He trusted instinct, and that trust was the engine of his action. This contrast is powerful because it reveals the difference between living attentive and living anesthetized. True transformation happens when we cultivate the ability to perceive, without rationalizing too much, what is already before us. Courage is not born from complicated formulas, but from attention devoted to the present moment. And the dog showed it in an exemplary way at the moment when it mattered most. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because what this animal teaches us is not restricted to this silent room. He tells us about the value of mindfulness, about listening that goes beyond words, about the connection that is only built in everyday life. This relationship, forged in morning walks, complicit glances and small gestures of care, revealed itself at that moment as an invisible pact of protection. A pact that, at the time of the crisis, spoke louder than any rationality. Behind the scenes of life, while many see only a dog lying at the foot of the bed, there is a hidden universe of subtle exchanges, trust, energy, affection. And it is precisely when everything seems to fall apart that this hidden truth comes to light. The dog did not know how to calculate risks, had no way to predict the outcome, but he understood, with the clarity of someone who feels without having to think, that the time to act had come. This revelation strikes us because it reflects our own condition. How often do we fail to act because we get stuck in endless analysis? How many times has the fear of failure paralyzed us? How often do we delay decisions, hoping for reassurances that never come? The dog did not fall into this trap. He did not expect absolute security. He just trusted what he felt, and that was enough to guide him. What makes this scene so impactful is that it's not just an isolated episode. It is a metaphor for life. It reminds us that in the midst of chaos, we must be willing to listen to what is within us. It is not enough to reason, plan, wait for the right moment. The right moment may not exist. What exists is the now, and it is in it that decisions gain strength. Time seemed to stand still in that room. On the one hand, the fragility of man, limited by his own body. On the other, the dog's unwavering determination, which did not accept being a passive spectator of an announced tragedy. With each movement of the dog, it became clear that there was a lesson in mentality. It is not a question of waiting for the ideal scenario, but of acting with the available resources in the time that remains for the noblest possible reason, to protect the one you love. Behind the scenes, life and death vied for space, but amid the vulnerability, there was a thread of hope held by four paws and a heart willing to fight. The dog did not need words to convey his message. His own restlessness was a cry. He would say, without saying, "I'm here, I'm going to do something." And this is perhaps the most shocking revelation. You don't have to be human to show humanity. Animals often remind us of what we forget, that life is fragile, that time is short, that attention to detail can mean everything. The dog wasn't just worried, he was determined. The man remained motionless, in silent struggle against his own body, but he was no longer alone. At your side, an attentive guardian ready to break through the barrier of passivity and turn instinct into action. The dog had already understood what needed to be done. Write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." The dog realized that standing there, trying to wake up his owner with jerks and moans, would not be enough. The shortness of breath, the prolonged silence, the absence of any reaction, confirmed that time was running out. And it is at this point that something great happens. The instant instinct meets courage, and heroic decision is formed. Without hesitation, the dog raised his head, took one last look at the lying owner, and as if understanding the weight of responsibility he carried, made the decision to leave for help. The scene seemed fraught with tension. The dark room, the motionless body on the bed, the dense air that mixed with the smell of cold sweat. The dog, restless, took a few steps to the door and stopped for an instant, as if gathering strength, as if confirming within himself that this would be the right attitude. Then, in a burst, it shot towards the exit of the house. Every second counted. Each step was more than physical movement. It was a silent cry against time, against fragility, against the death that haunted the environment. He darted across the hall, his fingernails scratching the wooden floor, producing a sound that sounded like the beat of urgency. He made it to the front door, where he had scratched other times to ask for rides, but this time it was different. The energy that emanated from his movements had nothing to do with playfulness or everyday anxiety. It was sheer determination. The dog knew it needed to get out. There was no room for doubt. Instinct, shaped by years of living together and an unbreakable bond, now morphed into conscious action. The night outside was silent, heavy as a guarded secret. The wind blew lightly, swaying the trees, and the moon cast a timid light over the deserted sidewalks. The dog shot down the street as if guided by an invisible force. His heart, racing, seemed to dictate the pace of the race. There was no time to think, only to act. This race, seen from the outside, could look like just a moving animal, but it carried in itself the metaphor of life. How many times do we also need to leave the comfort zone, go through the darkness, face the unknown, even without knowing what we will find ahead? The dog had no guarantees that he would be heard, that the neighbor would open the door, but he trusted. He was confident in the urgency of his mission. I trusted that if you gave it your all, something would change. Every second seemed to last forever. The silence of the neighborhood only added to the suspense. The dog, arriving in front of the next house, did not hesitate. He began to bark with all the strength he had. Intense barking, repeated, almost desperate. It was not the ordinary barking of one who reacts to a noise or a stranger passing by. They were sounds charged with intent, with despair, with message. He scratched at the door, jumped, barked again, insisted without stopping. It was as if he wanted to break through not only the wood of the door, but also the barrier of the neighbor's deep sleep. The impact of this scene is profound, because it shows us how, in decisive moments, there is no room for hesitation. The dog was not torn between possibilities, was not lost in thought. He chose, and this choice became a heroic act. The life of the owner was at stake, and the dog, with its desperate rush, turned into a messenger of hope. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because the decision of this dog makes us reflect on our own decisions. How many times in the face of a critical situation do we become paralyzed? How often do we let the fear of making mistakes keep us from trying? The dog had no such problem. He didn't get caught up in uncertainty. He just relied on the bond, the instinct, the urgency. This clarity is something we all need to develop, because in many moments of life, acting is more important than being absolutely sure. Behind the scenes of this race, there was also a portrait of transformation. That dog, who until then had been seen as a faithful companion for walks and quiet afternoons, now took on the role of hero. He walked through the night, carrying with him the weight of responsibility. He wasn't fully aware that he was saving a life, but he was sure that he needed to do something, and that's what it takes to turn any being into an impact agent. As the barking echoed down the silent street, It was as if time was suspended. Inside the neighboring house, the sound gradually infiltrated, invading dreams, causing unrest. The neighbor, still sleepy, rolled over in bed, trying to understand what was happening. Outside, the dog would not budge. He jumped, he scratched, he insisted. With each bark, it seemed to shout, "Come with me, someone needs you now." This moment, loaded with suspense, is proof that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite the unknown. The dog could have stayed in the room, could have remained next to the owner, just waiting for the inevitable denouement. But he did not accept being a spectator. He got up, ran, shouted, insisted. And this is heroism in its purest form, the ability to turn instinct into concrete action. And here is an important revelation. Heroism does not always show itself in grand planned gestures, but in the small acts of decision that happen in critical seconds. The dog did not have time to think about alternatives, did not draw up a plan, did not weigh risks. He just acted. And this action, born of trust and love, had enough power to change everything. The tension intensified every second. The neighbor, finally waking up, wondered why that dog was so insistent. From the outside, the animal seemed tireless, as if its own life depended on that moment. And in a way, it really depended, because the fate of its owner was directly linked to his ability to convince a human to follow him that night. The suspense was almost palpable. The clock was ticking. Every minute could be the difference between life and death. The dog, however, showed no signs of giving up. It barked, it scratched, it cried, it barked again. His voice was the only sound that broke the stillness of the dawn, an urgent call that could not be ignored. This episode, when we look in depth, is a powerful metaphor for the human journey itself. There are times when we are called to run, to act, to make decisions that cannot be postponed. Moments when every second matters, when the impact of our choices echoes beyond ourselves. The dog reminds us that courage is not in waiting for the ideal scenario, but in moving when everything seems to fall apart. The scene of that animal running down the street and barking at the neighbor's door is almost cinematic. It is as if we were facing a thriller script in which the unlikely hero launches himself against time, against silence, against the indifference of the world. And perhaps that is precisely why this story touches us so deeply, because it shows us that true greatness is not in those who have power, but in those who decide to use what little they have to make a difference. As the neighbor stood up, still confused, the dog intensified its call. There was no room for misunderstanding. The message was clear. Something serious was happening. I had to follow that dog. And at that very moment, the life of the owner about to go out was given a new chance. Write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." The dog stood before the neighbor's door, as if his whole existence had converged to that moment. His body trembled with tension, his firm paws scratched the ground, and his eyes, illuminated by the dim light of the moon that seeped down the deserted street, sparkled in despair. He barked incessantly, and each bark was charged with urgency, as if trying to translate into human language the severity of what was happening inside the next house. It was impossible not to feel the vibration of his energy. Each sound echoed not as a simple call, but as a cry of life, as if time itself was about to run out. The silence of the dawn, once absolute, was now continually broken by that insistent call. And with every second the tension grew, like a rope that stretches endlessly about to burst. The dog was not content to just bark. He threw himself against the wood of the door, clawed hard, jumped, retreated, and advanced again. It was a spectacle of despair turned into action. It was as if his whole soul was engaged in awakening someone, in making himself understood, in breaking through the invisible barrier that separates the instinctive communication of the animal from human rationality. Inside the house, the neighbor slept soundly. Silence brought him the comfort of dreams, lulled by the false sense of security that the quiet night conveyed. But the noise grew louder, invading his subconscious as a nagging, insistent warning that could not be ignored. First he moved in bed, annoyed. Then he opened his eyes slowly, still trapped in the fog of sleep. He tried to understand what was happening, but his confused mind was slow to process. Heartbeat. These were no ordinary barks. It was not that ordinary sound of a dog reacting to another animal or a passing shadow. There was an almost human tone to them, a tone of despair, of supplication. The neighbor sat on the bed, rubbed his eyes, looked towards the window, trying to locate the source of the noise. For a moment, he thought about ignoring her. After all, How often do dogs bark at night for banal reasons? But something in that insistent cadence and frenetic rhythm made him hesitate. The heart began to accelerate slightly, as if the body recognized before the mind that that call was not normal. Outside, the dog redoubled his efforts. He jumped against the door with all his might, slid, barked again, ran in short circles and moved forward again. Anyone watching from afar might have thought it was crazy, but it wasn't. It was a code. A distress call translated into canine language. It was as if to say, "Open the door, come with me. There is something terrible happening, I need you to follow me." The night, until then serene and ordinary, had become the scene of a suffocating suspense, a battle between the neighbor's deep sleep and the unwavering insistence of a dog that did not accept silence as an answer. The neighbor, still stunned, finally got up. His feet touched the cold ground and a shiver ran through his body. He walked slowly around the room, believing that he would find only a lost dog, perhaps frightened by some distant noise. But as he approached the door, he began to notice something different. The intensity of the barking, the way the animal desperately scratched the wood, the stare that seemed to pierce even the small gap under the door, all this conveyed a clear message. This was no accident. He hesitated. For a moment, he wondered if he should open it. And it was precisely at this moment of doubt that the dog further intensified the force of his attempt. The barking grew louder, faster, almost as if every second was a drumbeat marking the rhythm of urgency. The paws scratched the door violently, producing a dry, rhythmic sound like knocks demanding an answer. The neighbor felt the body shiver. There was something there that went beyond normalcy, something that his human instinct was beginning to grasp, even if his mind was reluctant to accept it. This moment is crucial, because it shows us how life often offers us signs that defy logic. The neighbor did not yet know what it was about, but his body was already reacting. His heart beat faster, his breathing quickened, and a growing restlessness took possession of him. It was as if the hidden truth of the situation was about to reveal itself, demanding from him an immediate decision. And here is the beauty of this moment. On one side, a dog that knew no bounds to save the one he loved. On the other, a human who, little by little, began to realize that he was facing something extraordinary. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because the awakening of the neighbor is also a metaphor for so many moments of our life. How many times do we need to be jolted awake by something insistent, almost bothersome, to realize that there is a bigger problem going on? How many times do signs knock on our door, scratch loudly, try to alert us, and yet we choose to believe that it is just noise, that it is nothing but detail? The incessant barking of this dog is like a living reminder that some signs cannot be neglected. They are calls to action. We are called to wake up before it is too late. The neighbor was getting closer and closer to the door. The sound was deafening now, enough to drive away any remnants of sleep. He felt his heart tighten without understanding exactly why. The dog from the outside seemed tireless. He barked, jumped, scratched, cried. It was as if he carried within him the strength of 1,000 voices crying out for help. There was no room for giving up. For every second of human silence, the dog responded with 10 seconds of noise, as if he wanted to compensate for the lack of reaction on his own. This moment, loaded with suspense, is also a lesson in mentality. He shows us that insistence, when driven by purpose, has a transformative power. The dog did not shut up at the first difficulty, did not give up after minutes without response. He insisted because he knew the owner's life depended on it. How often in our own journeys do we fail to insist on the signs that matter? How many times have we given up too soon, convinced that it wouldn't work? The difference between failure and transformation often lies in persistence in the face of initial silence. The neighbor, now glued to the door, could no longer deny it. There was something wrong. He didn't know yet what, but he knew it wasn't just a dog bothering at dawn. His intuition spoke louder, demanding attention, demanding an answer. And at the same time, he felt like he was about to be dragged into a situation that would change everything. The tension reached its peak. The dog, tireless, was the perfect translation of urgency. Their barking was not just noise. They were words without language. They were supplications made of sound. They were the essence of communication between different worlds. The neighbor was about to make a decision that could save a life, but in that instant, everything was still suspense. Everything was still doubt. Write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." The neighbor finally approached the door, still hesitant but unable to ignore the commotion coming from outside. The sound of the barking was like a continuous punch to his consciousness, forcing him to act. He took a deep breath, turned the handle, and as soon as the door opened, he was almost run over by the dog's burst of energy. The animal lost no time. It took 2 steps inside, barked in his direction with an almost desperate intensity, and immediately ran back outside, as if saying clearly, "Come with me, there is no time to lose." It was impressive how accurately the dog could convey his message without uttering a single word. The neighbor, still trying to understand what was happening, stood still for an instant. He watched the scene, confused, but at the same time captured by the force of that behavior. The dog ran back to him, barked again, and shot off again in the direction of the street, stopping a few yards ahead and looking back, waiting to be followed. There was no denying it. This was not common behavior. It wasn't a stray dog. It wasn't an animal begging for food. It was a guide in action, a being moved by the urgency to save. He hesitated for a few seconds, but then the restlessness in his chest became unbearable. The body responded even before the mind accepted. His feet touched the cold street at dawn, and suddenly he found himself running after the dog, which kept on shooting, stopping at every corner to confirm that the human was accompanying him. The sound of barking echoed through the empty street, and the scene seemed almost cinematic. The sleeping city, the absolute silence cut by the call of an animal that carried in itself the responsibility of saving a life. As he ran, the neighbor could feel his mind bubbling with questions. What could be going on? Why was that dog so desperate? What would you find when you arrive? But above all, there was an instinct, almost as primitive as that of the dog, which pushed him forward. He knew on some deep level that he could not ignore that call. The dog, in turn, ran with the precision of one who knows every stone on the sidewalk, every corner, every detour. It was as if he had rehearsed that path countless times, but now there was a difference. He was running not only for himself, but for the owner, for the life that was at stake. His loyalty had become a guide, a living compass. With each brief stop, when he looked back and saw his neighbor coming right behind him, he redoubled his energy, like someone who finds in the support of others the certainty that he was not alone in this mission. That run down the deserted street was more than physical displacement. It was a portrait of animal intelligence in action. Many would say that dogs are just instinct, but the scene showed much more than that. There was reasoning, there was strategy. The dog knew that he alone could not help the owner. He needed a human. He needed to lead him. He needed to transform his affliction into coordinated movement. And this decision, made in seconds, was proof that loyalty is not only feeling, but also concrete action. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this instant reveals something essential about the way we face our own journeys. How often do we need a guide in times of crisis? How often does someone around us, with subtle or even insistent signals, try to lead us out of a dangerous situation, but we resist believing that we can cope on our own? The dog shows that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. And in the same way, being willing to guide someone is one of the noblest forms of love. The neighbor, panting, felt every step weigh on his legs, but did not dare to stop. The dog did not slow down, only adjusted the cadence to ensure that he would not lose sight of him. It was like saying, "Don't give up, we're almost there, trust me." This mutual trust between different species turned into something bigger, almost symbolic. It wasn't just a man following a dog, it was life showing, behind the scenes, that cooperation can be born in the most unexpected places. The suspense increased with each meter traveled. The lights of the houses remained off. The deserted streets gave the feeling of isolation, and the neighbor's heart beat hard, not only from physical exertion, but from the fear of what he might find at the end of that race. The dog, however, conveyed an unshakable conviction. His posture, his movements, even the sound of barking carried a certainty. There was a clear purpose. There was a real urgency. There was something that could not wait. This moment is a vivid example of how loyalty can turn into practical intelligence. The dog did not just feel the pain of the owner, did not stand still waiting for fate to decide. He made a decision, planned a route and executed it to perfection. It was a pure demonstration of active mentality. It is not enough to perceive a problem, you need to act to solve it. And more than that, we need to involve others, when the situation exceeds our individual capacity. This scene also leads us to a greater reflection on choices. Many times in our lives we are put in front of situations in which we can remain inert or make the decision to act. And when we choose to act, we also have a responsibility to lead. We cannot always solve alone, but we can be a bridge. We can be the link that connects the need to the solution. The dog was just that, a bridge between the silent despair of the owner and the concrete possibility of help. When they finally reached the front of the house, the neighbor could see the signs of despair. The door ajar, the heavy silence that seemed to emanate from inside, and the dog now standing before the entrance, staring at him, as if to say, "Now it's up to you." There was a tension in the air, as if time had dilated. The neighbor felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know exactly what he would find, but he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was about to witness something that would change that night forever. Write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." The neighbor stopped for an instant before the ajar door, still trying to catch his breath from running after the dog. The silence that came from inside the house was heavy, almost suffocating, as if the very air was permeated with urgency. The dog, now motionless in front of the entrance, stared at him, his chest heaving and his eyes filled with an expectation bordering on despair. There was no way to ignore it. The message was clear: we had to get in. With quick steps and a racing heart, the neighbor pushed the door. The sound of creaking wood echoed through the dark environment, breaking the stillness, as if announcing the beginning of a painful revelation. The dog entered first, shooting towards the room, barking insistently, guiding every step. The neighbor followed, and as he walked down the hall, he felt his whole body shiver. Every detail seemed to amplify the tension. The cup still on the table, the clock ticking relentlessly, the lights off. Nothing seemed out of place, and at the same time, everything seemed wrong. Upon reaching the room, the scene unfolded with brutal force. The man was lying on the bed, his face pale, his body motionless, his breath short and irregular, as if struggling against an invisible force trying to wrest the air from him. The dog jumped next to him, turned to the neighbor and barked again, as if to present the picture. "Here it is, that's why I brought you." The neighbor was static for a few seconds, absorbing the gravity of the moment, feeling the weight of being in front of someone who depended entirely on his immediate action. That sight was shocking. The contrast between the apparent tranquility of the house and the silent struggle for life inside that room was breathtaking. The neighbor felt his stomach churn, but he could not allow himself to be paralyzed. In a matter of seconds, the mind searched for resources, first aid mementos, emergency numbers, anything that could turn that shock into motion. He quickly approached, touched the man's shoulder, and realized that he was still alive. There was still a thread of breath. There was still a chance. It was at that moment that the tension found room for a spark of relief. The neighbor acted quickly, picked up the phone, called the emergency services, described the situation as clearly as possible amid the urgency. At the same time, she kept close to the man, trying to keep him conscious, talking to him, encouraging him to resist. The dog did not come out close, as if actively participating in the process, sometimes licking the owner's hand, sometimes looking at the neighbor. In a vigil shared between species, this moment is one of those that mark forever the memory of those who live. The neighbor, still under the adrenaline, knew that he would never forget the scene of a dog leading him there, in time to save a life. And this is where the revelation gains strength. It was not just about animal instinct, but about a rare combination of intelligence, loyalty, and decisiveness. The dog not only noticed the problem, he took on the role of silent hero, guiding the steps that would allow the arrival of help. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this scene is not just about saving a life in danger, but about the impact of presence at critical moments. How often do we become passive spectators of someone else's pain, out of fear or indifference? How often do we not assume the role of guiding, of intervening, of transforming the situation of someone who depends on us? The dog shows that, in the face of a crisis, you don't have to have all the answers. You have to act, you have to be present, you have to be a bridge. The neighbor, seeing the owner still breathing, felt that there was hope. It was as if all the weight of the race, all the barking, every scratch on the door, every second of insistence, had converged on that moment. The relief was not yet complete, but there was one certainty: the worst had been avoided. Time, which until then had seemed an implacable enemy, now turned into an ally, because every extra second of life was a victory won by the instinct and loyalty of an animal that refused to give up. Behind the scenes, there is a hidden truth that we rarely acknowledge. In times of crisis, we are not just isolated individuals, we are part of an invisible network of support. The dog trusted the neighbor trusted his instinct to follow the animal, and together they created the necessary link so that life was preserved. This interdependence is what gives meaning to the human journey. No one goes through storms alone, and sometimes help comes from where we least expect it. This moment of intense relief also invites us to reflect on the choices that shape our mindset. It is easy to imagine the neighbor having decided not to open the door, having returned to bed, ignored the insistent call. It's easy to imagine the dog giving up after minutes of no response. But that's not what happened. There was insistence, there was decision, there was courage. And it is precisely this set of factors that turns the ordinary into the extraordinary, instinct into heroism, the ordinary night into a story that deserves to be told. While waiting for the ambulance to arrive, the neighbor stood next to the man, holding his hand, encouraging him to resist. The dog, with its muzzle resting on the owner's chest, seemed to watch his every breath as if his mission was not over yet, and in fact, it was not over. This was only the first stage of a journey that would still unfold, but that already revealed the power of loyalty, attention, and immediate action. Write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." The sound of the ambulance pulling away still echoed in the silent street, and inside the house, the mood was one of a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The neighbor, still breathing heavily, and his mind taken by the intensity of the last few minutes, stood before the family that now arrived in a hurry, in a state of shock at the sight of the scene. The man, rushed away by paramedics, was still in delicate condition but alive, and this simple word already carried with it an immense weight. Alive. The dog, which until then had not let go of its owner, finally relaxed for a brief moment, as if it had fulfilled the first part of the mission. His eyes, still moist and attentive, followed every movement, and it was impossible not to feel that there was in that expression a mixture of concern and hope. The family, realizing that everything had only been possible thanks to the dog and his insistence on seeking help, became rapturously emotional. The crying that echoed in the environment was not only of fear or tension but also of deep gratitude. The neighbor, still dazed, was surrounded by hugs, and the words spoken between sobs were simple and powerful. "Thank you for believing him. Thank you for not ignoring him." And in that instant, the figure of the dog gained an even greater dimension. He was no longer just the pet of the house. He was the hero who had saved a life and united everyone around an indisputable truth. The connection between human and animal goes far beyond what most imagine. The dog paced back and forth restlessly, as if to make sure everyone was understanding the message he had tried to convey that morning. There was in him an almost conscious posture, a kind of silent pride, but also a look of absolute surrender. It was like saying, "I would do it all over again, without hesitation." And this certainty, this loyalty, this instinct transformed into attitude, awakened in the family something that goes beyond simple gratitude. It was a call to reflection, a revelation about how often we underestimate the impact of the presence of these companions in our lives. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because the excitement that gripped that house was not limited to immediate relief. It opened space for a broader understanding of how invisible bonds sustain us in times of crisis. It is as if life reminds us, through unexpected gestures, that true strength lies in the connections we cultivate. The dog did not act out of obligation, he did not act out of reward. He acted because the bond with his owner was rooted in him, a bond that goes beyond any rational logic. And this hidden truth, that we are shaped by the relationships we nurture, is something that transforms the way we approach our own decisions. The neighbor, when retelling the story to the family, realized that his role there had also been essential. He could have ignored the barking, he could have closed his ears to that insistent call, but he chose to act. This seemingly small choice made all the difference. And here's an important point. How many times in our journeys do we fail to heed the signals, the opportunities, the voices that knock on our door? How often does our mindset make us believe it's just noise, when in fact it's fate itself trying to guide us to greater impact? In that emotionally charged environment, every gesture seemed to reveal something beyond the obvious. The hug between neighbor and family was not just a thank you. It was the recognition that behind the heroic act of the dog, there was also a chain of human decisions that made the positive outcome possible. And this perception, this mixture of inner transformation and collective consciousness, is what gives even more strength to the narrative. It was not just a rescue, but a journey of revelations, a powerful reminder that life happens behind the scenes, in the silent choices, in the small actions that change the course of an entire story. The dog, lying near the door after all the fuss, seemed to watch the space as a tireless guardian. His tired body contrasted with the intensity of his eyes, which remained attentive. He needed no words to be understood. His presence spoke louder than any speech, and in that silence filled with emotion, everyone present felt that they were facing something great. It wasn't just about saving a life. It was about reframing the value of connections, about seeing loyalty and intelligence in action as elements that reveal a greater truth about who we are and how we relate. The family, still emotional, stroked the dog gently, murmuring words of love and recognition. The neighbor watched the scene and felt within himself a subtle transformation, as if he had participated in an experience that connected him differently with the world around him. It was impossible not to think about how many times he had ignored small signals, how many times he had underestimated the strength of a gesture. Now in front of that four-legged hero, he realized that life was always ready to surprise us, as long as we were willing to listen, to see, to act. This scene, marked by gratitude and emotion, is also an invitation to reflect on our own journey. We all have moments when we need to recognize the value of the other, whether human or animal, and learn to trust that which transcends logic. The intelligence of the dog in seeking help, the loyalty in not giving up, the impact of his decision in changing the course of the night, all this becomes a mirror of the choices we can make in our lives. And when we look at this story in depth, we realize that it is not just a physical rescue, but a revelation about the importance of being attentive, of valuing connections, and of acting with courage in the face of uncertainty. Write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." The first lights of the morning began to paint the horizon as the news spread through the neighborhood. The street, which until a few hours ago had been the scene of a silent tension and a race against time, was now taken over by agitated voices, hurried steps, and looks that tried to understand what had really happened there. It wasn't just an ordinary event. It was something that defied everyday logic. Her dog that, moved by instinct and loyalty, had done the unthinkable, saved the life of its own owner. The neighbor, still stunned by the intensity of the dawn, repeated in fragments his version of events to each person who approached. He told how he had been woken up in the middle of the night, how that animal practically dragged him down the street to the scene of danger, and how, without this intervention, the outcome would have been irreversible. The story, so strong in its simplicity, did not take long to go beyond the limits of that small street. Within hours, reporters and cameras began pouring in, as if drawn by an invisible force guiding everyone toward the event. The dog, however, seemed oblivious to this move. He did not seek recognition, he did not seek applause. He stood by the gate, attentive, serene, as if all that noise were only the natural consequence of a mission accomplished. For him, the victory had already happened at dawn. Its owner was alive. But for those watching, it was bigger. It was the revelation of a hidden truth that we often choose to ignore, that love, when transformed into action, has the power to alter destinies. Reporters mounted their equipment, microphones and cameras in hand, ready to capture every word. The family, still shaken, struggled to answer questions, but could not hold back tears as they recalled what had happened. The neighbors told their version, describing the incessant barking, the urgency stamped on the animal's gaze, the despair converted into insistence until someone answered the call. Even the paramedics who participated in the rescue were interviewed, reinforcing that, if it were not for the intervention of the dog, the chances of survival of the owner would have been minimal. Each testimony added to the previous one, forming a mosaic of testimonies that built a unique narrative, that the hero of that night had 4 legs. And as always happens in moments of impact, experts were called to give their opinions. Veterinarians explained that dogs' perception goes beyond what human eyes can capture. They spoke of the ability to detect chemical changes, subtle variations in smell, almost invisible changes in the behavior of their owners. Trainers reinforced that, although the instinct of protection is natural, the decision to act so insistently, to seek human help in a strategic way, was something that was not taught in ordinary training. Animal psychologists talked about emotional intelligence, describing how some dogs are able to interpret risk signals and turn them into coordinated actions. One of them even said that if the animal had not taken this heroic stance, the story would certainly have ended in tragedy. These statements, displayed on television screens and circulated on local radio, acted as a trigger of authority. It was not only emotional opinions of witnesses, but technical analysis that gave weight to what happened. With each new report, with each expert speech, the image of the dog was raised to an almost mythical level. He was not just a pet, but a real guardian. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the impact of this recognition was not only in the act itself, but in the transformation it provoked in the mentalities of those who followed the story. The community, upon hearing the reports, began to rethink the way it saw the invisible ties that sustain everyday life. Suddenly, a simple neighbor became the protagonist of an exciting narrative. A family, which had experienced extreme fragility, became a symbol of hope. And a dog, who never sought the spotlight, revealed himself as a hero capable of inspiring people beyond the borders of that street. Printed newspapers carried shocking headlines. Heroic dog saves owner in dawn of tension. News sites described the scene in rich detail, fueling debate on social media. Comments poured in by the thousands, sharing personal stories, memories of animals who had also shown loyalty at critical moments. Each account strengthened the idea that this was not just an isolated event, but a collective revelation about the power of true connections. This is the point where we realize how some narratives have the strength to cross cultural and emotional barriers. The dog did not have titles, did not have medals, did not intend to be exalted, and yet his gesture unleashed a wave of recognition, emotion, and reflection that reached far beyond his own reality. This is the hidden truth that the media helped reveal, that the most genuine heroes are often not those who seek recognition, but those who simply act when it is necessary. The neighbor, interviewed more than once, could not hold back the emotion when he repeated how he was woken up at dawn, how he almost ignored the barking, and how, in the end, he was led to the scene that he would never forget. He said in a choked voice that dog had taught him more about courage in a few minutes than whole years of living together had ever shown. The family, in turn, declared with tears in their eyes that they could never thank them enough. For them, that dog wasn't just a hero, it was an essential part of their life journey. And this perspective deeply moved those who accompanied him, because deep down we all carry within us the ability to act decisively in moments of crisis. This dog became a symbol of loyalty and decision, and seeing this story being repeated in so many versions, more people realized that they could also be protagonists in their own contexts. It was not just about exalting an animal act, but about recognizing the universal power of love in action. With each new testimony, with each new expert who reinforced the importance of that dawn, the feeling was that life had offered a practical lesson in transformation. It was not theory, it was not discourse, it was a lived truth that courage and loyalty, when set in motion, can change entire destinies. This public recognition, which began simply, now expanded like waves on a lake, reaching people who would never know that dog in person, but who would still be touched by his story. And perhaps that's the biggest impact, realizing that heroism isn't restricted to grandiose scenarios or cinematic feats. It may lie in the insistence of a bark at dawn, in the decision not to give up in the face of the apathy of those who still sleep, in the silent strength of a bond that refuses to be ignored. He said, "That makes sense to me." The hours had passed, but the atmosphere still seemed charged with something difficult to explain. It wasn't just the story of a rescue. It wasn't just the heroism of a dog who defied the odds to save his own owner. What hung in the air was a kind of silent revelation, as if everyone who had contact with that account felt that there was much more hidden behind it than their eyes could see. The scene, repeated countless times on the news and in conversations around the neighborhood, kept echoing in people's minds, and the more that was said about it, the more the understanding grew that it was not just an isolated act, but a hidden truth that needed to be faced. that courage and instinct, when united, can overcome any obstacle, even when all seems lost. This thought moved each viewer differently. For some, it was a reminder of the invisible force that sustains the bonds of loyalty. For others, it was the realization that life can change completely in an instant, and that often that change is born of the decisions of those we least expect. There was a silent but profound teaching there. Heroism does not wear cloaks or medals. It reveals itself behind the scenes of existence when someone, or even an animal, chooses to act rather than remain inert. And the more people thought about it, the more they realized the impact that this type of narrative has on the collective mindset. Suddenly it was not just about extolling the bravery of a dog, but about looking inside and questioning, how many times have we ignored the call that life makes to us? How often do we turn a blind eye to obvious signs that we need to act? This story opened up the importance of small decisions, those that seem banal but that have the power to transform destinies. The owner, still recovering, came to be seen not only as a victim who narrowly escaped, but as someone who was given a second chance, a silent invitation to reassess his own journey. The family, once overcome by the pain of fright, now saw in the animal not only a faithful companion, but a guardian, a presence that transcends the idea of a simple pet. They had witnessed up close the real impact of instinct in motion, and it would mark them forever. The neighbor, in turn, could not hide the mixture of amazement and gratitude. For him, that moment had become a watershed. It wasn't just about heeding the dog's call. It was about being awakened to the truth that we are often foundational pieces in stories that we don't choose, but that choose us. His journey, hitherto ordinary, had taken on contours of transformation. And this is perhaps one of the greatest revelations that the episode brought. Life has its own backstage, in which every detail, every reaction, every decision matters more than we can imagine. Meanwhile, amid the collective recognition, an almost philosophical perception was also growing. The dog had not thought of himself, had not calculated risks, did not hesitate in the face of danger. He just followed what his essence said was right. And this purity of action launched a painful reflection on human nature. How often do we fail to act because we think too much, because fear paralyzes us, or because we wait for someone to do something in our place? Real four-legged heroism undeniably revealed that courage does not depend on physical strength or titles, but on the willingness not to abandon those who need us. And it was precisely this simplicity that made the act so powerful. The hidden truth, now revealed to all, is that many of the barriers we believe to be insurmountable are actually constructs of our minds. The dog did not see obstacles, did not see impossibilities. He saw need, urgency, and responded to it. This way of acting is a lesson that goes beyond the limits of logic and settles directly in the heart, remembering that when we are willing to trust instinct allied to courage, we can transform any scenario. The media, while exploring the case, inevitably gave voice to experts who tried to translate the inexplicable. They talked about heightened senses, about emotional intelligence, about the sensitivity that dogs have to pick up on almost invisible changes. But beyond all the technical explanations, what really mattered was the emotional effect it had on those who accompanied it. People who had never reflected on their own bonds began to rethink their relationships. It was as if, faced with the heroism of a dog, each one was invited to look behind the scenes and ask, "What have I done for the people I love? How far would I go to protect who is important to me?" This kind of impact goes far beyond headlines. It settles in family conversations, in solitary reflections before bed, in the internal dialogues that shape our mentality. It was a living reminder that even when all seems lost, there is always the possibility that one gesture of courage will change everything. And this thought, as simple as it was profound, resonated like a silent echo that accompanied all who heard the story. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what really emerges from this narrative is the understanding that the boundaries we believe insurmountable are often just reflections of a mindset conditioned by fear. The dog did not reason about probabilities. He did not make risk calculations. He just followed the straight line of instinct allied to love. And in that gesture, he showed something that we all on some level have forgotten, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward in spite of it. This kind of revelation is transformative because it puts us in front of our own responsibility. We can no longer claim ignorance when we see that even an animal is capable of choosing to act rather than retreat. The hidden truth, exposed so clearly by this episode, is that life is always offering us chances to be silent heroes, not always with applause, not always with witnesses, but always with impact. And just as the dog did not need a spotlight to fulfill its role, we are also called to act in moments when no one is looking, but when everything depends on our decision. What is clear is that courage is contagious. The dog's gesture not only saved one life, but also rekindled in hundreds of people the memory that we all carry within us, the ability to act. This is the kind of impact that spreads like fire on dry straw, a flame that is lit in the heart of those who listen and that inspires to transform mentalities, choices, and attitudes. And maybe that's exactly why so many people were moved by the story, because deep down, it reminds us of what we often try to ignore, that heroism is not something distant, restricted to great deeds or historical figures. He is present in everyday life, in the small revelations, in the gestures we make without expecting anything in return. He is on the silent journey of caring for someone, of protecting, of being present when everything seems to fall apart. This episode with the dog is not just an exciting narrative, it is a mirror. It reflects back to us the possibility of being different, of being better, of allowing ourselves to act without thinking only about what we will gain in return. And as we reflect on it, we realize that the true impact of this story is not only in having saved one life, but in having awakened so many others to the power of courage in action. He says, "I'm on this journey too." The silence that followed after all seemed to carry a weight almost impossible to translate into words. It was as if time itself had stopped before that scene, so that every detail could be absorbed by those who were present. The owner's labored breathing, still recovering, the family's watery eyes, the serene presence of the dog, who, without understanding the extent of what he had done, remained firm next to the one he loved most. There was something almost sacred about that atmosphere, a mixture of relief, reverence, and deep gratitude that transcended logical explanation. And it is precisely at this point that the story becomes something greater than the simple account of a rescue. It becomes a living metaphor, a hidden truth revealed, a powerful reminder of the impact of our choices, however silent they may seem. When the media recorded every second, when neighbors counted and retold the scene, it was not only curiosity that moved people, but rather the need to connect to a narrative that reminded everyone how fragile and precious life is. And at the center of it all was a dog that had no titles, no status, possessed nothing but the loyalty and unconditional love it carried in its heart. He did not ask for anything in return, did not expect recognition, did not put himself above anyone. He just did what needed to be done, and that just was enough to change everything. When we look back, we realize that many of the most transformative moments of our existence do not come from great planning, but from immediate decisions, from sharp instincts, from small actions that carry in themselves immeasurable power. This story shows us in an almost disconcerting way that heroism is not a privilege of the strong, nor a skill restricted to the prepared. Heroism is presence, it is courage, it is mentality that activates when the world seems to collapse. And here's a fascinating detail. The dog did not know that he was being watched, was not aware that his actions would be told in newspapers, shared on social networks, and discussed at dinner tables. He just followed what was inside him, a silent call that transcends logic and connects directly to the essence of what it means to care. This is the kind of revelation that disarms us, because it forces us to face the inevitable question, and will we, when life demands an immediate answer, be ready? This is a reflection that goes far beyond the episode itself. It touches the field of decisions, of transformation, of what is often hidden behind the scenes of our choices. How often do we ignore signs that are before our eyes? How often do we fail to act because we believe that the time is not right, or that someone else will solve it? The dog did not have time to think about these justifications. He just felt the urgency and acted. And in doing so, it showed us that perhaps we are getting too used to waiting, to postponing, to procrastinating. This is the point at which the story begins to turn into a collective metaphor, because we are not just talking about a physical rescue, but an internal call to rescue in ourselves the ability to act, to choose not to wait for things to simply fall into place. The impact of this narrative is so profound that it becomes impossible not to think about how many lives, physical, emotional, or spiritual, could be saved if we cultivated this mindset of presence and readiness. And there is something even stronger here, the revelation that heroism, when born of loyalty and love, carries a transformative power that is not limited to a single life. It reverberates, inspires, generates movement. This dog saved its owner, but it has also touched the lives of neighbors, journalists, experts, and now that of thousands of people who know its history. It's a ripple effect that keeps growing because the message that stays can't be contained in headlines. It settles in the heart of the listener and remains there as a constant reminder that courage exists within all of us. The most striking thing is to realize how something seemingly small can become a game changer. The gesture of an animal in a silent dawn has become capable of provoking discussions about mentality, about values, about the hidden truth that governs our relationships. This impact is only possible because, in essence, we all seek the same thing: to believe that there is meaning in life, that there are worthwhile connections, that there is something greater guiding us, even when we do not see clearly. And maybe that's why so many people get emotional when they hear stories like this. It's not just about the dog, it's about us. It's about remembering that we can still be better, more attentive, more present. It's about the revelation that we don't have to wait for the perfect moment to act, because most of the time, the perfect moment doesn't exist. What exists is the opportunity to respond to the call when it appears, whether in the form of a cry for help, a look of sadness, or a silence that reveals more than 1,000 words. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the great transformation that this story provokes is not only in the relief of a successful rescue, but in the mentality that it awakens in each of us. She shows us that living is not just following the routine, but being ready for the critical seconds when everything can change. It's about developing sensitivity to perceive the signs, courage to decide, and enough love to act, even when there are no guarantees. This is true heroism, not the one that seeks recognition, but the one that is born from the simple fact of caring. And if we stop to reflect, we will see that every day we receive small invitations to be heroes in someone's life. Perhaps not in the dramatic sense of saving a life in danger, but in the gesture of offering attention, of listening with empathy, of reaching out at the right moment. Small acts that carry in themselves the same essence of that grandiose gesture of the dog: loyalty, love, and attention. These are the three pillars that underpin any real transformation. And this is where the message crystallizes. This dog has shown us that loyalty, love, and attention can save lives in critical seconds. This phrase may sound simple, but it is a truth capable of crossing generations. Because no matter how advanced the technology, how sophisticated the society, at the end of the day, it is these three elements that keep human life going. They are the invisible threads that sew relationships, sustain journeys, and transform destinations. And while this story echoes, every person who hears it becomes a part of it. Every tear, every smile of admiration, every silent reflection is proof that the impact does not end the instant it happened. It lives on, spreading, inviting others to reflect, to transform, to awaken to the importance of being present. He says, "I'm on this journey too. And if you have come this far with me, you have already realized how much this story brings a value that goes beyond a simple report. If it made sense to you, if it touched you in any way, it is worth subscribing to the channel to continue following content that awakens reflections and shows the real power of the connections that surround us. Also, leave a comment below to let me know that you stayed with me until the end. It can be something simple, like, "I'm with you until the end." I will love to see who has followed this whole journey along with me. And of course, if this video brought you any emotion, leave the like, because it is the most natural way to strengthen this exchange that we have created here. Now, if you want to continue in that same energy, there is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and come with me to follow this conversation together.